Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall, and today I will be joined by Mark Schindler, a man of many talents whose work is featured in many places. He writes about basketball for the WNBA and for Basketball News, does a variety of basketball podcasts, including one for Indy Cornrows covering, you guessed it, the Indiana Pacers. And that's where we start with Mark today, talking about a potential Malcolm Brogdon trade and his fit with Immanuel Quickley, potential Myles Turner trade, and whether or not Indiana would be willing to trade back from 6 to 11. Maybe Julius Randle is involved in that deal. Who knows? We'll get into it all right now with Mark.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, and we wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We're now available on all platforms, including, and you already guessed it, if you can see my smiling face, on YouTube. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall, a play-by-play broadcaster during the summer. Kind of a bum. I mostly just talk about the New York Knicks. Alex Wolf is absent today, but he is the editor-in-chief of The Strickland. Please go check out all the fantastic Knicks and draft coverage they have there on social media at thestrict.land. And I won't hold this up because we're about to be joined by Mark Schindler, who is amazing, as you're going to see, to talk a whole bunch of permutations with the Indiana Pacers. So we'll get into that right now. All right, guys, as promised, we are joined by Mark Schindler, who, as we noted, has an extensive resume, a writer at Basketball News and for the WNBA, and has a variety of podcasts, including for Indy Cornrows, the athletic NBA shows Daily Ding, and, of course, Tag the Roll. We had your partner, Jake Rosen, on a little while ago, Mark. He's saying your praises, and I kind of filed it away in the back of my head. I was like, all right, we got to get Mark on at some point. So happy we could do this, man, especially on the precipice of the draft. I'm sure you're busy. So really, really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on, Gavin. I'm psyched to be here. When you reached out, I was like, all right, Locked On Knicks. I can't complain, man. I'm excited to be on. It's one of the pinnacles of podcasting, making on the Locked On Knicks.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm flattered, man. All right, let's start here where the Knicks and Pacers intersect. They are two teams. I feel like we're constantly having Tony East on, the host of Locked On Pacers, because it feels like the Knicks are always rumored to be going after Myles Turner. Now Malcolm Brogdon is in the mix. There's some talk of the Knicks looking to trade up in the draft, more commonly looking up to number 4. But I want to talk about that 6th pick, because it wouldn't shock me if the Knicks want to make some kind of consolidation move. They already have, I believe, 7 guys still on their rookie contract on the team. They are not playing a lot of them because Tom Thibodeau isn't particularly interested in playing all of them, or at least all of them with any kind of consistency. And it almost doesn't make sense for them to add someone at 11 who might not make his way into the rotation, but adding someone at 6, whether it's a Keegan Murray falling that far, or it's taking a shot at a Shaedon Sharpe, or maybe, I know AJ Griffin rumored to fall a little bit more because of injuries, but maybe the Knicks are just in love with him. Maybe it's Benedict Mathurin. I have no idea who it could be, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Knicks made that move up. Where do you think the Pacers are at, a team that perennially looks to at least secure competitiveness? Where are they at in their thinking in terms of making that 6th pick versus potentially trading back in the draft?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Woj reported yesterday before Game 6 of the Finals that the Pacers have been in discussions with the Kings to try and move up for the 4th pick with the intention of going after Jaden Ivey. I'm still reticent to think that they're actually changing their direction, but by all accounts, we're starting to see more of they want to focus on more long-term future instead of what's happening next year. I still TBD until it actually happens. I'm not going to believe it, because I'm 25 right now. That hasn't happened in 25 years being on planet Earth. So, that's it's asking for a lot. But in terms of trading back, I think I would be surprised by that unless maybe a younger player or somebody becomes available, or I don't even know who I could consider with the 6th pick right now off the top of my head. But I do think if there was something that got made very attractive to them, they would consider it. But by all accounts, it does seem like they're pretty excited about having the 6th pick. They were definitely disappointed to not have the 4th, because I think they were slotted to have 4th or 5th in lottery odds. But I think that's where they're at right now.
I guess given that more long-term vision, what do you think the temperature in the room is on Malcolm Brogdon, a guy who obviously has a pretty checkered injury history? Yeah. I think I can't say I watched a lot of Pacers down the stretch. I would assume him and Tyrese Haliburton fit pretty well together, but also you have 2 guys who are a little bit similar in how they play, just in terms of the caginess. And maybe, I mean, obviously in the dream world, you'd pair Halliburton with someone like a Jaden Ivey, who just has that burst of athleticism, and you have a little bit more of a complementary backcourt. But do you think they still see him as a long-term piece and someone where they say, hey, we could bring in young guys, but he sort of allows you to maintain a competitiveness? Now we have to get blown away to move off of him, or they're like, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if someone threw us a first-round pick for him?
Yeah, my assumption right now, and just, based on things that have been reported, it seems like he's being viewed as more of a negative asset right now, which I think makes sense, given the injury history, given where he's at age-wise. And I mean, and that's not to say that he's a bad player. Like, I think he's a very good player. We've seen negative contracts get moved with regularity, and that doesn't mean that the Pacers won't get anything back. But I do think in terms of what you're actually getting back, you're like, okay, maybe you're getting like a very late lottery pick at best, it feels like. Obviously, there's going to be salary filler back too, but I think that the Pacers should be willing to move off of Malcolm. I mean, I think that he played very small sample with Tyrese, but I do think it's their fit hasn't been awesome to start. Like, as good as Tyrese was in his time in Indiana, he still had a lot of deferring, which was kind of something that I would like to see change in this coming year. And part of the reason why I really want to see them lean into a youth movement and really lean into Tyrese is, if you make that trading Domas when we did, lean into being a team that's going to be better in 2 or 3 years, not just right now. Because I think if you still have Malcolm, he's a good enough basketball player where he's making an impact, and you're not going. It's hard to be a losing team when Malcolm's playing a part and he's healthy. But I also think, again, like, if you're trying to unlock more of some of that wiring shift maybe and making Tyrese more of a primary option, then I think moving Malcolm would probably be for the best.
It seems like they've threaded that needle so well, right, over the last 15 years of never really fully rebuilding, but always seeming to find a way to reload. I mean, first, like, going from like the Reggie Miller, Steven Jackson, Jermaine O'Neal teams into Paul George, then that into whatever this team is. But it's always been missing that sort of ceiling, and I think in some ways they're in a very similar position to the Knicks, where they're looking for that move. They're a little further along potentially, but they're like, what is that move that takes us up another level? And in that vein, can I present you with Julius Randle, a name that is also not particularly hot on the trade market, a name that it's often reported, I think most recently by John Hollinger, that a lot of teams have been viewing as potentially as a negative asset, like, oh, maybe if the Knicks attach a second-round pick. I don't know if I necessarily buy that. I think I buy that there are plenty of teams around the NBA who just say, no way, we don't really want that guy in our locker room, or we don't really want that guy taking up a large portion of our offense. But I do think there are teams maybe seeing it as like, hey, like, that level of talent just isn't really readily available. There aren't a lot of free agents that just made a second-team All-NBA, especially ones making the kind of money that Julius Randle is currently making. Do you think the Pacers would potentially see him as a buy low candidate, either in a deal for Brogdon or Turner or a future draft pick? Or is he the kind of guy that they're like, if we're going to go in this youth forward direction, we don't want the Knicks problem to become our problem, where Julius Randle wants to be the dude, and all of a sudden that gets kind of tricky when you have more promising guys who deserve those touches?
Yeah, well, I mean, just as an aside, like, I think Julius is a definite bounce back guy. Like, I think there were, as you're well aware, there were a million things that compounded wrong for him this year. And I think that he's obviously not quite that guy that we saw the year before, but I also don't think that he's just that complete reversion to who he was this year as well. Obviously overtaxed. I think that there's definitely real room for a team to look at him and think, okay, if we tamp down your role a little bit, and we get you to buy back in on the defensive end again, and we surround you with better spacing talent and, find better ways to use you, then I think that there could be real value in doing that. But I agree with you. Like, I think it's going to be more about, okay, what teams are really strapped in ways to actually acquire talent. Like, to me, Malcolm is very much somebody like Lakers last year would have made sense if Malcolm had been healthy. Like, a team that can really only trade contracts for contracts back, because they don't have a lot of flexibility. And I think in some ways, like, that's why Malcolm would make sense for New York. Like, I think New York has a lot more flexibility than they've probably gotten credit for. Unless, it depends how you view Nerlens Noel's contract, but it's still something you can throw in on top of things. But I think that they would be a lot less open to trading for Julius now, unless they really view him as somebody who can get back to being that level of player. But honestly, like, it wouldn't have surprised me at all if that was a trade that they looked into prior to hitting resend with everything reset with everything going on with Domas.
All right, guys, when we come back with Mark, we are going to continue talking Malcolm Brogdon trade, and we'll eventually get into some stuff on a potential deal for Myles Turner. But first, I want to tell you about one of our old favorites. It's betonline.net. They're your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup, the NHL Hockey Conference Finals, Major League Baseball, and, of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. And you can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. They actually have odds up now on who's going to win the NBA championship a year from now. I think I told you a day ago, I really like the Denver Nuggets. But if you want to get crazy, your New York Knicks, 150-1. Who knows? They swing a trade for a star. RJ Barrett takes that next step. Things go right in the playoffs. Crazier things have happened. Well, maybe not crazier, but similarly crazy stuff. Anyways, BetOnline is where the game starts. It would really heat up the all-time greatest low-key rivalry in the NBA between him and Sabonis. I think if he went to the Pacers, those games would be pretty epic. I don't know why those two guys just really seem to hate each other.
They do not like playing one another. I always enjoy watching it.
It's not because I remember like 2 years ago, no one was really talking about it, but every time they play, I was like, they just like it's like they were occupying the same niche in the NBA, and they're like,
exactly.
No, I'm the sixth best power forward in the league. No, man, I'm the sixth best power forward in the league.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. How do you feel about Brogdon's defense at this point in his NBA career? Because to me, that would be sort of the swing with acquiring him for the Knicks, because his ability to just be crafty and use his physicality on offense. And I know he's had kind of wild variance as a shooter, but I guess that I would assume later in his career that sort of averages out as like a solid, if not spectacular shooter. I guess all that is to say, as he ages, I'm not super worried about him offensively, and maybe that's wrong. But defensively, I think if you're acquiring him, you're saying, this is almost an investment in Immanuel Quickley to some extent, in that he allows Quickley to do the things he does great, where Quickley has point guard responsibilities, but doesn't have sort of Chris Paul-esque point guard responsibilities, and that there's someone else to share that load offensively. And defensively, you have someone who's big and strong and physical and smart, who can take the tougher assignment on the other end. But I think that's contingent on Brogdon really not falling off a cliff athletically, because he's one of those guys who I think can't afford to lose like even like 5 to 10% of his current foot speed and just savviness on that end of the floor. So how do you think those two would fit together as a backcourt, particularly on the defensive end of the court?
I think part of the issue for me is I view Malcolm as somebody who's much more like he's in essence a combo guard, but he's really a wing. Like, he's a lot better defending up a position than he is defending down. Like, I think his team defense can be good. I think he can be solid at the point of attack, but it's mostly against bigger players. Like, he really struggles defending guards, especially at this stage. So to me, like, I don't think, like, I mean, even this year, they would cross match him and not match him up. Either they'd put him on the slowest guard, or they would really avoid at all costs to put him on guards. I do think like his strength and wingspan can be really good. Again, playing up, like, part of it was really wacky, and I didn't love how they did it, but they experimented having him defend Giannis the last 2 years, which, that's. He did his best. I think that's the best way to put it. But I think that there's value in that. And like you mentioned too, I think his biggest asset is his physicality. Like, he's for pound, one of the strongest players in the NBA. That shows up in his drive game. Like, after he came back from injury, I think he was averaging over 20 drives per game, which is, top notch, right up there near the top of the league. The finishing off drives is pretty average to slightly below, because he just doesn't have a lot of lift. I think it got a little bit better this year, if I remember correctly, but like, he's ideally, to me, somebody who is doing more stuff operating off second side or attacking off the catch rather than, running a ton of offense, because he had a very high usage load to start the year. I think he was around like 29 or 30% usage before he got injured this season. That was with Domas on the roster too. So I think, to me, that's where one of my hangups would be with him on this roster, just knowing how Tibbs likes to play his guys. Normally, I think that trope can be a little bit overplayed, but with Malcolm, like, it's very, very much the case, because given his play style is physical, and that's what he leans into. Like, I think that's a very large contributing factor of how off injury is. So it would be, especially like if he's being brought in and he's going to be used the same way as in Indiana, I think it would be, I mean, not a mistake, because he would be an upgrade for sure, but I think that would just be tough in terms of what that looks like as a long-term prognosis for sure.
No, and I think it's this tricky thing, right? It's who should be handling the ball and who is actually handling the ball. That's one of the
Yeah.
biggest questions for the New York Knicks, and that was true last year. Where look, Alec Burks was playing point guard for 34 minutes a night, and this player
Bless his
who
heart.
who I really
best.
like, who is really good, was just being grossly misused and asked, like especially late in games, to create. And he finished the year shooting something like 34% on layups, which was not what you want.
Yeah.
And Brogdon is this interesting proposition in that he's far more qualified than a Burks to carry that role. But when you're trying to turn RJ Barrett into an all-star, and someone like Immanuel Quickley is showing shades of making that next step and at least being interesting in his ability to really generate a lot of separation and get to the rim. And that's still very much TBD whether he can do that over the course of 82 games as a starter against defenses that are fully locked in. But it's a kind of a situation where you need to see that if you're the Knicks. Is Tibbs going to say, hey, we're giving this young buck the reins, and Malcolm, at this point in your career, we feel like you're best off the ball, and we feel like you're best with RJ and IQ scrambling defenses, and you get to go like use that strength against a defense that's out of sorts? Or is he saying right now Malcolm Brogdon is the better player than Immanuel Quickley? He's the better player than RJ Barrett, and he has to be the number one guy. And it's that weird thing where it's like, are you trying to be average right now, or are you striving to hopefully be good down the road? And maybe that's sort of the question we keep coming back to, that both the Knicks and Pacers are kind of dealing with.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point too, because I think it's obviously, even if you're moving somebody off ball, like you can have higher usage even if you're off the ball. Like it's so I think what will be interesting to me is I wrote about this as the year wound down. Like I am a believer in Immanuel Quickley as a lead guard. Like I think it's less so about like, is he going to be the guy who organizes your offense in the half court? I don't know. Like I think that's something that we need to see. But he did get better with his reads and just doing things as a playmaker this year. And the biggest thing for me is just, can they actually lean in a transition? Like, sorry for swearing on your show, but like that's been one of the biggest issues. Like we see it happen. Like it'll happen with the bench when he's running the bench unit. But like that's what the starting unit needs to embody too. And I think that was a large issue for me this year. Can they lean into that with the starting unit if they move quickly in there? Because like even if he's not quote unquote a point guard, like the things that he does, really pushing the pace, generating paint touches, even if he isn't quite getting to the rim, just like the quickness with which he does everything allows him to do a lot of things that are primary, like, in terms of just setting the defense into rotation even slightly. And I think a lot would just depend on like how willing is Tibbs to prioritize that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, and this is what we keep saying on this show, so I won't beat the point home, but you just need to see if he can do it at a certain point, and that's been the bummer the last few years. We haven't gotten to see it, and then we do see it, but you need to see it over a larger sample size. I guess that being said, we got to do it. It's a Knicks guy and a Pacers guy. Got to check in on Myles Turner, the forever future Knick, who maybe will never play for the Knicks, but seemingly again, this is all vibes. This is all like hearsay to some extent, but seemingly the vibe right now is Mitchell Robinson, semi unlikely, fairly unlikely. I don't quite know how to define it, to come back to the Knicks. And in turn, they're on the market for a new center. And if they want to have Julius Randle play power forward for them, which probably they do, they still desperately could use a shooter at that spot. And even if they have Obi Toppin playing power forward for them, I think it would be really interesting to have someone who could space the floor. And then it allows you to use Obi where he's at his best as sort of a pick and roll guy and a dive guy and someone who could spray passes around on the short roll. And because of that, Turner is still interesting, but he was this guy. I remember we were talking to Tony about this early in the season where he had that big stretch of games, right? He had the 40+ point game. Might have even been against the Knicks. I can't remember.
It was Wizards, but he also had a really good game against the Knicks.
He had like 8 threes against the Knicks in a game or so. It was just terrible. But and he had like repeatedly these talks of like, oh, I thought I was ready to ascend. I thought I was ready to be, if not an all-star, just a sub all-star, average 20 points per game, get a lot of touches. And right after that, it sort of settled down and he sort of became who he always is. Where do you think he is as a player? And do you think there'll always be somewhat of an identity crisis there where he does these niche things extremely well, but he sees himself as something more, and that maybe sabotages him from being at his best at doing those little things really great?
Yeah, I think it's tough with Myles because, again, he went out with the foot injury. And I give like a little bit of just a buy with consistency this year, just given the state that the team was in, how weird some of the stuff was. Like Karis LeVert just really, he went from looking like somebody who could potentially lead the offense last year to just somebody who was like not even making basic, kicks as a passer this year. It was very weird. I've never seen a player, change up that much as a playmaker, across like a 6-month span. But, I think it's tough with Myles because like even when, and like Rick Carlisle said as much multiple times this year, like it's not even that, like he could be a star in his role, I think. And he has been for much of his career, to be fair. Like he's a really damn good defender when he's healthy. But the problem is like so often, like he'll defer sometimes. And I think we saw that as an issue throughout this year. Like in that game against the Wizards, it wasn't just Myles getting a million touches. Like he was doing the stuff that he can to pick his spots and be aggressive, playing largely off the ball, taking his shots when he got them. Like that's the kind of stuff that we've been wanting to see all the time. And I think like I'm there with you. I think for me, where I understand the identity crisis is like, the way that things got handled between him and Domas was like very clearly untenable for a while. I think, and it's more so the way that they talked about it. Like they never, as an organization, viewed that as a positive. And like, even if you don't view having two bigs in your starting lineup as a positive, you have to act like it. And the team never did. Like they always talked about it like, oh, well, we have an interesting roster construction, or like, I mean, like even Rick said at the beginning of the year that it provides some challenges for them. And like, not that it's a lie, like it's true. It definitely provides some more challenging pathways. But if that's what you're presenting as a public front, your players know that. They're going to see that. So I get where Myles is coming from with that. I just don't think that role is changing at all on the Knicks. So that would be interesting. Like I do think like he could bring a lot more than Mitch does in some ways, especially who Mitch was for large swaths of 2021, 22, which was disappointing to say the least. But him and Julius as a processing and passing front court would be interesting to me because like Julius is a really good passer and he has good vision, but it's not quick. Like everything has to be held, has to be seen. And Myles is like, I won't say that he's like a low field player or anything, but it's taken him a while to get to where he's at in terms of, seeing some things on the court and making the right moves. So I think like there's room for that to work. And I honestly, like, I wouldn't say that it's going to be better or worse than the Mitch Rob pairing. I think there's ways it could go in either direction. And just given how that situation's gone, like, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if they ended up making that deal.
Yeah, I think I mean, this is also just where I'm at in terms of every potential power forward center combination, but I'm definitely more intrigued if Obi Toppin's the guy there because he is,
agreed.
unlike Randle, he is that quick processor and he is someone who makes fast decisions on the run, and just very, very intuitive player in a way where Randle, to your point, I think it's a great one, just has to be slow and meticulous. And if you're the Knicks and you're already, again, maybe have high skill guys at 1 through 3, but certainly at an athleticism deficit at 1 through 3, especially if they don't find a way to trade up for someone like a Jaden Ivey. I think that quick processing from your bigs becomes even more essential to get guards that extra step when a defense is scrambled. And Randle was almost the worst possible fit with who the Knicks had on the perimeter because there was no one to make up for it when he was slow to make a pass out. And it was why he was much better, I think, a year before, where guys around him were just sort of stationary and it was, all right, you got to do everything. And that was almost easier for him than saying you got to do some things and you got to fit in a little bit more. All right, guys, that's it for today with Mark. I know I'm bummed too. I had a whole lot of fun talking to him, but not only is Mark an Indiana Pacers expert, he is also an NBA draft expert. So we will be back with Mark next week to discuss everything draft, including some thoughts on why Tari Eason might just be a better prospect than Jeremy Sohan, and a deep dive on why Jalen Duren might just be the best possible pick for the New York Knicks. So all that to look forward to next week, including a whole lot of great coverage leading up to the draft. But until then, I'm Gavin. I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace out.